This Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:30 p.m. local time in the Central Time Zone. And for all of you UCLA Bruin fans or any fans out on the Pacific Coast where UCLA resides, 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time, we have the 2-5, 1-4 in Big Ten play UCLA Bruins traveling to the 5-3, 2-3 in Big Ten play Nebraska Cornhuskers. This game will be streamed on the Big Ten Network. Nebraska opened up as a 7.5-point favorite, a touchdown favorite at home. The line has moved down slightly to Nebraska minus 6.5. So they are laying 6.5 points at home in Memorial Stadium. For UCLA, this is another game where they are traveling a few time zones over, but it's only 2 time zones over. Only going from Pacific to Mountain to Central. And the distance traveled in total is, I would say, about half or maybe slightly over half of the distance traveled to Rutgers. So not as extreme of a travel as to Rutgers or to Happy Valley, where they played Penn State respectively. This is a huge game for both teams. UCLA needs this win if they want to win out and if they want to be bowl eligible, because they can only afford one more loss. And since they're coming off of a bye week, the time to win starts now against a Nebraska team that looked very vulnerable and put forth, I'd say, an A-level performance, maybe even A+ against Ohio State, but fell short. And they've been inconsistent all season long, so it's not a guarantee that Nebraska is going to show up in this game and give their A+ effort. But on the Nebraska side of things, maybe it is, because this game, per power ratings, per record, per the eye test, is the easiest of all of Nebraska's November games by a significant margin. UCLA is an inferior team to USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa. They just are. And this game is at home. Nebraska has some momentum after that Ohio State game. Here is where, if you're Matt Rule, if you're the Nebraska Cornhuskers, you earn your 6th win of the season. You earn win number 6 for the first time since 2016. It's been that long since Nebraska's been bowl eligible, but you earned that win here if you're Nebraska. So UCLA is going to be motivated. They've had an extra week to prepare for this game, but I can tell you that Nebraska is going to be motivated as well, especially after what Rule thought and believes, and I agree with him, was a breakthrough type of performance against Ohio State. Nebraska's given a 67.8% chance to win this game, according to ESPN's FPI, by the way. And before we go into more power rating information, before I give you player statistics, team statistics, we dive in and I give you my preview and prediction. I just ask that you help the channel out and also that you help yourself out and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new college football content, whether it's about Nebraska, UCLA, the Big Ten, or college football. College Football with Sam is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and with your help, we are aspiring to be the best college football channel on YouTube. And you help us out by watching our content. Hitting the notification bell will help you to digest more of the best college football content on YouTube. Like the video to help us get into the algorithm, if you may. Share this video around to other college football fans who are looking for another voice in college football to pay attention to. Because I can tell you, if you love the sport, you will love this channel. And also comment your thoughts on this game down below. Your preview, your prediction, who do you think the most valuable player of the game will be? And join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I think we may have over 100 members now. It's not on the top of my head, but we're going to try and get to 1,000 members by the end of the season. I think that's a pretty realistic goal given how many have joined in the previous few weeks since the Discord server has been up. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, there is, of course, the Patreon page where you can sign up as a member, or the merchandise store where you can purchase merchandise or even a College Football with Sam mug, if that's your thing. The links to those are in the description and also down below in the pinned comment at the top of the comment section, like where my Twitter handle is and also where the Discord server is. But let's dive in here and look at the forest, look at the trees, look at the broad picture, the big picture, and then we'll dive into the details in a few minutes. UCLA is only viewed as 0.9 points better than the average college football team in FPI. And they're viewed as 4.3 points worse than the average college football team in S&P+. Nebraska is viewed as 5 points better than the average college football team per FPI. And per S&P Plus, they're viewed as 7.8 points better than the average college football team. So there's a lot of variation in this matchup, more than in other matchups that we've covered this week. This may be the matchup where S&P Plus and FPI have the biggest disagreement out of all the matchups that I'm going to be covering this week. And there are more games that we'll be talking about tomorrow. So again, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. You're not going to want to miss our analysis. But according to FPI, factor in 3-point home field advantage for Nebraska. It is a 3:30 game. The sun will be setting as the game comes to a close in the second half. And Nebraska can get pretty loud. So maybe we bump that up to 4 or 5 points of home field advantage. Per S&P Plus, Nebraska would be picked to win anywhere from 15 to 17 points, factoring in that 3 to 5 point home field advantage. Per FPI, however, that is only about 7 to 9 points. So that's a pretty big difference there. FPI is picking Nebraska to win by 1 fewer touchdown, basically, than S&P Plus is. S&P Plus here is telling you take Nebraska. Just take Nebraska, trust me later. FPI is basically in agreement with where Vegas is and is saying it's going to be a competitive game. Nebraska should be the favorite, and they should because they're the better team. But UCLA may be up to something here. I mean, they beat Rutgers on the road. They played Penn State and Oregon more respectfully than I thought they were going to, if I'm being honest. And they have a good run defense. Nebraska wants to run the football. And Nebraska's offense overall has been pretty inconsistent. And UCLA's sort of found their footing on offense as the season has gone on. Looking at points per play margin and expected points added margin, UCLA is a negative 0.148 points per play margin. That means on an average basis, they score 0.148 fewer points per one of their plays compared to one of their opponent's plays. In expected points added margin, expected points added is basically per any given play, depending on where you are on the field and depending on, I think, your past performance. Maybe I'm mistaken there. And depending on how you're doing in the game, a variety of factors, more factors than points per play margin, how many points are you expected to score? And they're only a 0.003, which is very, and I mean very low. Nebraska in comparison is 0.105. That's the lowest EPA margin and points per play margin total I have seen all week thus far in my preview and prediction videos that I have recorded and produced. That's the lowest from UCLA. I mean, this is a team that's 2-5, a team that struggled to beat Hawaii, a team that in the end only beat Rutgers by 3. Their 2 wins are by a combined 6 points. They lost to Minnesota by 4. They lost to Penn State by 16, and it was 27-3 for a good part of the ball game. They lost to Oregon 34-13, and a pick 6 is included in there. Lost to LSU 34-17. They have underrated talent. They do, and I think their talent is keeping them in some games, along with their effort. They produce a lot of good effort. They always play hard, and I think that their coaching staff's actually a little bit underrated. I say that because to make the trip to Rutgers and perform the way that they did was impressive for UCLA. Rutgers is pretty bad, but for UCLA and how bad they have been and how, Chip Kelly did not do much good with this roster when you think about the future of UCLA's program from a 2023 perspective. So, I mean, it's interesting here. I can say that at least. And then as for Nebraska, their points per play margin is barely in the negatives. It's the negative 0.012 points per play margin. Nebraska has done less with their offense than one would expect. And I think that in part explains the difference between the points per play margin and the EPA margin, just a little bit, though not exactly. Nebraska, on an average basis, what that points per play margin is telling you is that they barely lose the games they play in. And they crushed UTEP. They crushed Colorado. They handily beat Purdue after struggling for 2-3 quarters. And they beat Rutgers. Again, another game that probably should have been more of a dominant win than it was. And then Indiana crushed them. It looked like in the moment they crushed their soul and kind of took the season away. They proved that wasn't the case against Ohio State. They played Ohio State very close, exposed some things of Ohio State, lost by 4 to them, and they lost to Illinois by 7 points in overtime. I mean, this Nebraska team has a lot more than what they have showed, but that's potential. That's theoretical. Objectively, this is a team that is very, very inconsistent. And I think that's a big part of the reason why the spread is only Nebraska minus 6.5 and why it only opened up as -7. Nebraska, I think, should be favored by more if they were playing up to their potential. Their potential is a lot higher than UCLA's, but UCLA is playing closer to their potential in my mind than Nebraska is right now. UCLA has, well, faced the 4th toughest strength of schedule nationally. They have one of the toughest schedules in the country, up there with Florida, Georgia, Wisconsin, etc. They're 70th in game control as well. So they do not do a good job of winning games or staying in games or positioning themselves to win games. 69 teams would be predicted to perform at a higher level with UCLA's schedule compared to how they have performed with their schedule so far this season. Nebraska's faced the 11th toughest strength of schedule. That's because they played Indiana and Ohio State, 2 teams who, in my view, are top 8. And in power ratings, Indiana is top 15, though closing in on the top 10 very quickly. And Ohio State's unanimously number 2, and in some instances number 1 in most power ratings. So they've played a tough schedule. They played Ohio State competitively. Indiana just destroyed them. It was obvious. They're 28th in game control consequentially, where not that many teams would do better with Nebraska's schedule than how Nebraska has performed. So that should be encouraging to Nebraska fans. It should. It's, of course, not a guarantee they'll win 6 games, but Nebraska is projected to go bowling still after those back-to-back losses to Indiana and Ohio State. I think that the key matchup in this game is Nebraska's defense and how they will do against a UCLA offense that has found some security in the passing offense. And that's also where Nebraska's weakness is defensively. Against Indiana, it looked like maybe that defensive front was a total paper tiger, but I don't think that was the case. It was probably an overreaction by me, I confess, and by many others, where, holy cow, this Nebraska team looks bad. But Indiana at peak efficiency is also that good. Nebraska went 0 of 5 on 4th down. They shot themselves in the foot repeatedly, and Indiana didn't do that whatsoever. In fact, Indiana played a pretty perfect game early on outside of that one failed 4th down. And the reason I say that, and I keep going back to the Indiana game, is there's a pretty good chance that is an anomaly, because against Ohio State, they shut down the run. Against Illinois eventually wore them down with the rushing attack at the end, but it took a while, and they didn't run the football all that effectively on Nebraska. Colorado couldn't run the football. UTEP couldn't run the football. Northern Iowa could, but that's also kind of their identity, and they're good on the offensive line. Rutgers struggled to run the ball outside of a few plays. Same thing with Purdue. In fact, Purdue completely struggled to run the football on Nebraska. This defense is one of the better defenses in the Big Ten and one of the better defenses in America, but it's not perfect. It's like the best teams in the country this season. There is no greatest of all time caliber team. There just isn't. I'm telling you that. No team is going to finish this season outside of maybe Oregon, and part of me is inclined to say Georgia, but I don't think so. Maybe Oregon could finish out if they begin to dominate people like they did on Mighty Illinois, and they do that in the playoff, they do that in the Big Ten championship game, etc. Maybe them. Everyone else, I don't think so at this point. I really don't. And that's how Nebraska's defense is. Like, they are toward the top of the nation in a variety of categories. They have a really good defensive coordinator, a near elite to elite defensive coordinator. But their defense is not generational. It's not generationally talented. It's not like the Georgia defenses of 21 or 22 or Michigan's defense last year. It's not. It has some weaknesses. You see right here for these teams, UCLA right now in terms of passing offense is outdoing Nebraska in a variety of categories. Nebraska passes the ball more than than UCLA does, but UCLA completes 65.49% of their passes, which is 24th. UCLA gains 78.63% of their offensive yards passing the ball. Like, they have to pass the football to have any success on offense because they really struggle to run the football. And yet, they're having success there. They're averaging 7.4 yards per pass attempt, which is 61st, 11.2 yards per completion, which is 93rd. They're both better than Nebraska by around 30 placements in those categories. In terms of the offensive line, in terms of protection, Nebraska allows a 6.4% sack percentage, which is 71st. UCLA's worse there, 8.13 sack percentage. UCLA can't run the ball. They're only averaging 2.5 yards per carry on the ground. They're only averaging 64.6 rushing yards per game, which is dead last in the nation at 134. The only way they're going to have success against this Nebraska defense, a Nebraska defense that is only allowing 3 yards per carry on the ground. That's 10th. 5.7 rushing first downs per game, which is 8th. Actually tied with UCLA there. They only allow 5.7 rushing first downs per game. And only allowing 92.1 rushing yards per game. The only way for UCLA to have success offensively is to pass the football. That's it. That's the path for the upset here, is the same game, or at least close to the same game, that Ethan Garbers had against Rutgers is replicated in this matchup. Ethan Garbers against Rutgers went 32 of 38 for 383 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had a 96.2 QBR. And he had 48 rushing yards for a touchdown, long of 49, took a few sacks, but had that very long scramble. Keegan Jones, Maliki Matavao, the tight end, TJ Harden, running back, Logan Loya, Titus Mokeo Etemalala, they all stepped up and they had a good game, and UCLA, through their passing offense, was able to beat Rutgers. That's the same path to victory here. It is. And as for Nebraska, it's a bit similar, in my opinion, as well, because you look at Nebraska's rushing offense, it's way better than UCLA's. They're averaging 1 more yard per carry, 3.5. It's 107th, which is bad, but that's much better than 133rd. Way better. They have 124.1 rushing yards per game. It's 96th compared to UCLA placing 134th there. And against Ohio State, they ran the football way better than they did against Indiana. And Ohio State had more TFLs and sacks than Indiana did. And yet Nebraska ran the football better because they were able to have effective downfield blocking. That was, to me, the most encouraging thing from that game, is Nebraska responded like that in downfield blocking. And they were getting to the second level consistently, especially in the second half. Like, their success running the football was not just from Dylan Raiola's long scramble, although that was a huge part of it, because he also took some sacks, so that yardage was pulled back on the stat line. But Dante Dowdle and Emmett Johnson were having some pretty good carries, and some impressive holes were opened up for them. Nebraska's a bit more flexibility on the offensive side of the football, but UCLA is up there in terms of rushing defense with the Cornhuskers. They're only allowing 3.4 opponent yards per carry, 20th. They're only allowing 5.7 rushing first downs per game, 8th, and 98.6 opponent rushing yards per game, which is 11th. And UCLA's played a tougher schedule, and UCLA's faced better rushing offenses. I think that Oregon and Penn State right now have better rushing offenses than Ohio State does. And as for Indiana, they do not have the same explosive capability that a Penn State does running the football. They don't. So there's a chance UCLA could actually have the better rushing defense than Nebraska here. There's a good chance of that. But I think that these rushing defenses are both near the top of the country. Statistically, that's true. And because of the high caliber strength of schedule they've played, I think there's a lot of evidence to back that up. And for Nebraska, circling back to their passing offense, only averaging 10.3 yards per completion, which is 123rd. They need to get that number up in this game if they want to secure victory. Same with the 6.7 yards per pass attempt, which is 97th. They need to do a better job of protecting the quarterback. That's certainly true. And as for the Cornhuskers, make your open throws. Really, to Dylan Raiola, make your open throws. Because this UCLA defense on the season, they have talent up front. They're going to shut down the run game. They're going to make Dylan Raiola throw. They only have 10 sacks on the season, 4 interceptions. And when you look at their passing defense this season for UCLA, they are outside the top 100 in basically every category except for opponent yards per pass attempt, where they're 74th and allow 7.5 yards per pass attempt, and opponent yards per completion, 10.8. And I think a huge part of that is because whether it's Garrett Nussmeier, whether it's Drew Aller, whether it is Dylan Gabriel, a lot of those teams, while they have some explosive capability, against UCLA, from what I understand, they mostly utilized checkdowns in that game to beat UCLA's defense. UCLA is 119th, an illustrious 119th in sack percentage. So Nebraska, they have the better defense, they have the better offense, they're the better team. The path for this upset is ultimately, can Ethan Garbers, his receivers, tight end, and his offensive line, can they all function together, put together a good game? Include the running backs here too, because they've been a threat in the passing offense. And can they pass on this defense, keep Nebraska's defense honest? Maybe that opens up the ground game for TJ Harden, and they can score some points here and perhaps pull off their third win of the season. And as for Nebraska, if UCLA can't pass on them, or they struggle to, or they're just okay at passing the ball, in either scenario, the game could get ugly very quickly in favor of Nebraska, and they earn their 6th win of the season. Offensively, I like the Cornhuskers everywhere. I think they have the better receivers, both wide receiver and tight end. They have the better offensive line. They have the better running back room. Quarterback is really the only area where I think there is a legitimate conversation to be had. And you look at Ethan Garbers on the year, 1,484 passing yards, completes 64.9% of his passes, 8 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 134.6 passer rating. You look at Ethan Garber's QBR, it's 65.3. That is 53rd nationally. Meanwhile, for Dylan Raiola, 1,744 passing yards, completes 66.1% of his throws, 7.1 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, a 132.3 passer rating, and a 63.9 QBR, 56th. They've played similar strength of schedules. They both have some underrated wide receiver and tight end talent. They both have offensive coordinators who I don't think are the best in the country. And yeah, the quarterbacks both have an extremely high ceiling, like Garbers showcased against Rutgers. And I think like how Dylan Raiola showcased for much of the year, earlier part of the year, like against UTEP, at times against Colorado, at times like first half against Illinois for much of the Illinois game. That was a game where he basically was carrying the Cornhuskers on his back for much of the game, especially late. And ultimately, that's why things fell apart, because Illinois was playing as a team. And Nebraska, well, in that game at least, fell apart. Over his past 3 games, Dylan Raiola has had a quarterback efficiency rating of under 70. A 5.8 QBR against Rutgers, a 60.9 against Indiana, a 69.8 against Ohio State, and he's had less than a 100 passer rating in his previous 3 games. After averaging before that of a passer rating that was well above 150 in the month of September, in the month of October, he's averaged less than a 100, and it will stay that way. So really quite the drastic swing. I know he played tougher competition, obviously, but still drastic swing. He's been a bit on the downswing. Things have been getting worse every week for Dylan Raiola, outside of last week where he improved over his performance from Indiana, but not by a ton. I think it was more the defense and the offensive line improvements, along with Ohio State's vulnerabilities, that helped Nebraska play in a game that was that tight. Meanwhile, for Ethan Garbers, his low point arrived against Oregon. Had an okay game against Minnesota, but threw 3 picks there. Statistically was pretty okay, though. And against Rutgers, he had the best game of his entire career, and I talked about that in the reaction to the matchup. But these teams outside of quarterback are different, and that is in favor of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska's leading rusher is Dante Dowdle with 410 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns. He right now, I think, is the running back that fits what they want to do the best. I thought it was Emmett Johnson after that Indiana performance, but he was running tough and running hard against Ohio State. And I think if the offensive line and the blocking does their job and Dowdle's able to hold on to the football, I think that he gives them their best chance to win, because he's a power back. He'll fall forward. He'll always fall forward and gain yards after contact. Always. And for a team that needs as many wins as possible, that's your best option. right there, especially in Big Ten play, where power and strength and conditioning beat speed and acceleration every single time. Every single time. Emmett Johnson and Ramir Johnson also have over 100 rushing yards, and Emmett Johnson does have 1 rushing touchdown. Ja'Cory Barney Jr., he has over 100 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. You look at the receiving end of things, Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nair, Thomas Fidone, Ja'Cory Barney Jr., Jalen Lloyd, Emmett Johnson, and Ramir Johnson, they all have 100 receiving yards or more. This Nebraska offense, one thing they are good at, that I will give credit to Marcus Satterfield and the staff for doing, is they spread the football around. And they have multiple threats, multiple targets, multiple angles to keep your defense honest and exploit them. Isaiah Nair has 4 receiving touchdowns. Jamal Banks has 2. Some players to pay attention to on the UCLA side of things are TJ Harden and Jalen Berger, who each have over 100 rushing yards. UCLA only has 3 rushing touchdowns on the year. They're only averaging 2.5 yards per carry. It is a honestly pathetic rushing offense, especially compared to what they had last year, where they were pretty strong with Carson Steele. They're led by tight end Moliki Matavao with 251 receiving yards, no receiving touchdowns though. Logan Loya has 181 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. He leads the team in receiving touchdowns with 3. Rico Flores, TJ Harden, Keegan Jones, J. Michael Sturdivant, Quasi Gilmer, and Titus Mokio Atimalala, I hope I said his name correctly, they all have at least 100 receiving yards or more as well. And several of them, Sturdivant, Jones, Rico Flores Jr., and TJ Harden, they have at least 1 receiving touchdown. So those are some players to pay attention to. I would take Nebraska for reasons that you can imagine that I already gave you for individual player stats and also team performance. I would take their offense over UCLA's any day. And it's the same thing defensively. And we don't have to go much into conversation with this because the numbers bear this. I mean, you even look at turnovers, and in all turnover statistics, which there is like 18 of them, 19 of them on the screen, UCLA only leads in 1. That's fumbles per game. That's it. Nebraska's better with turnovers, offensively, defensively. In passing defense, Nebraska's opponents complete 64.68% of their throws on them. That's not good. That's 103rd. But UCLA finds a way to top that by letting opponents complete 69.05% of their passes, which is 128th. Nebraska only allows 209.9 passing yards per game, which is 46th. UCLA allows 268.7, which is 113th. Teams average a 146.9 passer rating on UCLA, which is 101st. Teams average a 141.1 passer rating on Nebraska's secondary, which is 90th. And again, in rushing defense, Nebraska leads in yards per rush, rushing first downs per game, rushing yards per game, so on and so forth. You look at total defense, Nebraska only allows their opponents to average 4.9 yards per play. UCLA allows their opponents to average 5.5 yards per play. Nebraska only allows 62 plays per game, which is 12th. UCLA allows 66.6, which is 39th. Nebraska allows 302 total yards per game, which is 11th. UCLA allows 367.3, which is 56th. And then in scoring defense, which ultimately matters the most, Nebraska is top 25 in opponent points per game and opponent red zone scoring attempts per game, and they are top 50 in opponent points per play. UCLA is outside the top 75 in all of those categories. And again, they've played similar schedules. So the evidence, the sample size, the eye test, everything tells us that Nebraska is better on defense, also on offense. But on defense, unlike offense, it's pretty clear, I think, that Nebraska is better at every position. I would take their D-line, Nash Hutmacher, Ty Robinson, MJ Sherman, and Jamari Butler, over the following: Olufemi Oladejo, Jay Toye, Devin Aopio, Sitivini Havili Kafusi. That was rough. Apologies if I mispronounced any of those names, but I would take Nebraska's defensive line. I would take Nebraska's linebacker core, Makai Bayer, John Bullock, Javin Wright. I would take them over UCLA's Kane Madrano and Carson Schwissinger. And in the secondary, I would take Nebraska's Sear Wright, Deshaun Singleton, Marquise Buford Jr., Malcolm Hartzog, Tommy Hill, Isaac Gifford. I would take them over Keelan Moore, Ramon Henderson, Brian Addison, Jalen Davies, and KJ Wallace. Nebraska's better at all positions on defense. And this Cornhusker defense has 23 sacks on the year, 9 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and 28 passes defended. In the trenches, I would take Nebraska over UCLA. Don't think we have to add another comment to that. They have the better D-line and the better O-line. For special teams, however, I love Jonathan Hull. I do, or John Hull. I don't know if his actual name is Jonathan or not, but he goes by John Hull. I like John Hull. What he did against Ohio State was awesome, but that is one game for one position. Brian Buschini's been a pretty good punter, but he punts for far more yards per punt attempt than the net yards per punt attempt is produced. So Nebraska's punt coverage team, just statistically, is not all that sound. And again, as for the kicking game, we just have one sample size to go off of. And as for UCLA, they're top 100 in special teams efficiency per FPI. Nebraska's not even top 100. So I'd slightly lean UCLA here, but it wouldn't shock me that if the kicking game is fixed, if John Hull's going to be accurate for the rest of the year, if he's confident, and the blocking up front is good, it wouldn't shock me if Nebraska is the better special teams in this game. In coaching, only area where I have questions is offensively. Offensively, I think it's a push. If you really put a gun to my head, I would probably side with Nebraska there. And I think obviously head coach, defense, strength and conditioning, you got to side with the Huskers there. As for Deshaun Foster, what he's doing at UCLA, look, he's in year one. He was left with a cupboard that was pretty dry, pretty barren, not a whole lot of resources, and he's a first-year head coach, and he's never been a coordinator. Matt Rule is a veteran head coach, and he has more resources, and he has a better staff. And with all that being said, that's why I'm picking Nebraska to win this game. I think it will be close, but I think Nebraska covers. I think they win 27-17. I think that there will be moments where against this UCLA defense, the offense is just going to look awesome and they're going to look electric. Then there are other moments where it just completely turns off, like it has been for the entire season, inconsistent. And the defense, I think, will allow an explosive passing play or two, and I think UCLA will find ways to score some points. But at the end of the day, Nebraska earns their 6th win of the season, locking up a bowl game. They're going to win 27-17, covering that 6.5 point spread. An area that I have concern with is that bye week. And the fact that also after that Ohio State game, I don't know if Nebraska's going to put forth that same effort. That's why I'm picking 27-17. In a reactive sense, in part almost, not the intuitive sense, but the logical sense, like not my gut feeling, but my brain feeling, I can envision Nebraska winning this game by multiple touchdowns and it not even being close after halftime. But intuitively, I feel like coming off of the bye and after a confidence-inducing performance against Rutgers, UCLA probably feels like they can win this game. And they believe, I think, that they can win this game. As for Nebraska, we've seen before how their losing ways historically and culturally have caught up to them. Matt Rule said that after the Ohio State game, he felt like there was a breakthrough. I believe him on that. I think Nebraska's going to win this game. But don't be shocked if there is a mental hurdle, if there seems to be a block on this team and this game is a struggle, because UCLA, they want to go bowling too. And they think and they believe that they can win this game. As for Nebraska, I think they believe they can win this game, but UCLA is going to put their best effort forward, I think, coming off of a bye. And as for Nebraska, I don't think that you're going to get the same effort that the team produced against Ohio State, at least performance-wise, effort-wise probably. But that was the extreme end of the spectrum. That Nebraska team that did what they did against Ohio State probably doesn't lose to Illinois, and they play Indiana more competitively. It's still probably a multiple TD win for Indiana, but it's a game for more than the first 2 drives. But also, you're not in the same way going to get the Nebraska team that showed up against Indiana. That's the other extreme of the spectrum. So somewhere in the middle after 2 weeks of extremes is probably where you'll see Nebraska. That's why I settled on a 27-17 point Cornhusker win. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Kind of Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the link in the description down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Big Red, and go Bruins.